Hello, guys. Welcome back to Children of Light podcast. Today we're going to be back in Acts. We're doing chapter 7 today, and it's just going to be Ethan today going through Stephen's sermon. So here's Ethan.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So today, as Matthew just stated, I'm going to be going through Stephen's defense, or also known as Stephen's sermon, at the beginning of Acts 7. This covers a very large portion of Acts. This is, he goes through an unimaginable, death after this whole defense too, and we will get to that with Matthew in the next, and Josiah is going to be covering a bit more after that. So, because of how long this section is, I've made my own outline for this to follow with Stephen's sermon here, similar to what I did with Peter's sermon in Acts 2, if you remember. So, let me break it down. So, in the first section, we have Acts 7, 1 through 8, which is covering Abraham, Isaac, and the introduction to Jacob. And then we have Acts 7, 9 through 16, Jacob and the patriarchs, or also his children, the brothers of Joseph. Joseph is a patriarch as well. Section 3, Acts 7, 17 through 38, which is the longest section here. It's going to be on Moses. And that one I am definitely going to do much more overview-ish of because of how long it is. Section 4, Acts 7, 39 through 43, which could be Israel's rebellion. And then Acts 7, 44 through 50, this is section 5. This is God's tabernacle. Stephen will be talking about that briefly to defend himself for the way that they rebuked him to the temple. And then the final section is going to be Acts 7, 51 through 53, which is Stephen rebuking the Sanhedrin. So this is the outline that we're going to be using for Stephen's sermon. So let's get right into part 1 here. So I'm going to read the first 8 verses. The high priest said, "Are these things so?" And he said, "Hear me, brethren and fathers. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran, and said to him, 'Leave your country and your relatives and come into the land that I will show you.' Then he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. From there, after his father died, God had made him move to this country in which you are now living. But he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot of ground, and yet even when he had no child, he promised that he would give it to him as a possession and to his descendants after him. But God spoke to this effect, and that his descendants would be aliens in a foreign land, and that they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. And whatever nation to which they will be in bondage, I myself will judge, said God. And after that, they will come out and serve me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham became the father of Isaac, and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. So this is the first section that we see Stephen begin an amazing defense of the faith from the Old Testament. And it is very detailed, going all the way back to the time of Abraham and all the way to the tabernacle. We see that Stephen doesn't really answer the high priest's question here. And instead, in verse 2, Stephen jumps right into his defense using the Old Testament. We see Stephen quotes here from Genesis 12:1 of God's command to Abraham to leave his home country and family to go to the land where God was calling him to be. Abraham was from the land of Ur, which was located in the land of the Chaldeans, as we see in Genesis 15:7 and also in Nehemiah 9:7. Stephen is quoting these things perfectly from the Old Testament, almost verbatim, almost word for word. We see verses 5 through 7. He quotes perfectly from verse 5, Genesis 17:8, verse 6, Genesis 15:13, and verse 7, we have Exodus 3:12. Now, we move on to verse 8, and we see the circumcision covenant prior to Isaac being born and Abraham had Isaac circumcised on the 8th day, as we just read there in verse 8. This circumcision was a sign of the Abrahamic covenant, as we see in Genesis 17:11. Now we're going to be moving on to Jacob, Isaac's son, and his sons, the 12 patriarchs, one of them being Joseph. What the 12 patriarchs simply means is that like I just said, Jacob's 12 sons became the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel, as we see again in Genesis 35:22 through 26. A lot of these verses are going to be coming from Genesis in the coming sections here. Now, moving on to section 2 of our outline. As I've already stated now twice, Jacob and the patriarchs are what we're moving into. So let me read verses 9 through 16. The patriarchs became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt. Yet God was with him and rescued him from all his afflictions and granted him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his household. Now a famine came over all of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction with it. And our fathers could find no food. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our fathers there the first time. On the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's family was disclosed to Pharaoh. Then Joseph sent word and invited Jacob his father and all his relatives to come to him, 75 persons in all. And Jacob went down to Egypt, and there he and our fathers died. From there they were removed to Shechem and laid in the tomb which Abraham had purchased for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor in Shechem. So we see in this section is a fairly simple outline showing how Israel came to be in Egypt through this famine. This section has, of course, a heavier emphasis on Joseph than his brothers, but it still shows the emphasis on the patriarchs, his brothers. As we saw way back in Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery because they were jealous of him because of the favoritism that Jacob had towards Joseph. Joseph was the youngest. But them selling Joseph into slavery, in a sense, backfired because Joseph found favor with Pharaoh. Pharaoh made Joseph second in command over all of Egypt. As Stephen words it, the governor over all of Egypt. Genesis 41:40 through 46. Verses 11 through 13 here summarize both of the comings of Joseph's brothers during the famine in Egypt. The first coming, they didn't know that Joseph was the governor. They didn't even know who he was. But then in the second coming, he made himself known, and then he disclosed it to Pharaoh and then called. And then as we see here in verses 14 through 16, shows how Joseph invited his father Jacob and his whole family, a whole of 75 people, came. And then Stephen just summarized that Joseph and his brothers, the patriarchs, were laid to rest. That was not including Jacob because Jacob was buried elsewhere. Jacob was not buried in that same land. They were laid to rest now, and now we move into our third section. This is the bigger section, and I'm more so just going to overview it after I read the whole thing. So now, starting in verse 17, we're going to be going all the way through 38. This is going to be a pretty long section. So, but as the time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt, until there arose another king over Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph. It was he who took shrewd advantage of our race and mistreated our fathers so that they would expose their infants and they would not survive. It was at this time that Moses was born, and he was lovely in the sight of God, and he was nurtured 3 months in his father's home. And after he had been set outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and nurtured him as her own son. Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds. But when he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his mind to visit his brethren, the sons of Israel. And when he saw one of them being treated unjustly, he defended him and took vengeance for the oppressed by striking down the Egyptian. And he supposed that his brethren understood that God was granting them deliverance through him. But they did not understand. On the following day, he appeared to them as they were fighting together, and he tried to reconcile them in peace, saying, "Men, you are brethren. Why do you injure one another?" But the one who was injuring his neighbor pushed him away, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? You do not mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday, do you?" Verse 29, at this remark, Moses fled and became an alien in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai, in the flame of a burning thorn bush. When Moses saw it, he marveled at the sight, and as he approached to look more closely, there came the voice of the Lord. "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob." Moses shook with fear and would not venture to look. But the Lord said to him, "Take off the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and have heard their groans, and I have come down to rescue them. Come now, and I will send you to Egypt." This Moses whom they disowned, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge?" is the one whom God sent to be both a ruler and a deliverer, with the help of the angel who appeared to him in the thorn bush. This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the sons of Israel, "God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren." This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness, together with the angel who was speaking to him on Mount Sinai, and who was with our fathers, and he received living oracles to pass on to you. So, going back to verses 17 through 19, we see the introduction of just the flourishing of people in the land of Egypt. A new Pharaoh arose who knew nothing about Joseph, and he had all the infants, but as we see, male only, sent into the Nile. We see this in Exodus 1:22. Verses 20 through 21, Moses was born and nurtured, as we see, in his father's home for the first 3 months, and then we see that Pharaoh's daughter nurtured Moses as her own son after that, to protect him from being thrown into the Nile. Verses 23 through 26, a little bit of a longer section there, show Moses' adult life, how he visited the sons of Israel and defended them, and then he came back again and defended them from hurting each other after he had struck down the other man, the Egyptian. And then we see in verses 27 through 29, this was quoted from Exodus 2:14, how Moses then fled because of their accusation towards him, and he became an alien. He had 2 sons, Gershom, Exodus 2:22, and Eliezer, Exodus 18:4, as we see their names mentioned. Then we see in verses 30 through 34, we see multiple quotes, all from Exodus. This is a heavily quoted section that Stephen has here. We see all through 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34 is quoted from Exodus 3, verses 2 through verse 15. All of those verses are almost verbatim quoted there. And now finally, in the final section here, we have verses 35 through 38 show us the start of the long line of judges and deliverers that God sends for Israel, starting with Moses, as Stephen brings light here, as he worded, "This is Moses who said, the sons of Israel, God will raise up for you a prophet like me for your brethren." And it was throughout all that time that people would have thought that it would have been one of those judges, maybe in the book of Judges, or maybe it was Joshua, or maybe it was somebody else, and it ended up not being any of them. Now we're going to be moving into section 4, which is verses 39 through 43. This is Israel's rebellion. Our fathers were unwilling to be obedient to him, but repudiated him, and in their hearts turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, "Make for us gods who will go before us. For this Moses, who led us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him." At that time they made a calf and brought a sacrifice to the idol, and were rejoicing in the works of their hands. But God turned away and delivered them up to serve the host of heaven. As it is written in the book of the prophets, "It was not to me that you offered victims and sacrifices. 40 years in the wilderness was it, O house of Israel. You also took along the tabernacle of Moloch, and the star of the god of Rumpha, the images which you made to worship. I also will remove you beyond Babylon." So here we see Israel rejected Moses' leadership. And not only did they do that, but they rejected God as well. And they wanted him to make them gods. They asked Aaron to make them a god like they had in Egypt. They wanted to go back and do the same thing, fall into the same sin that they had already committed. They convinced Aaron to make for themselves a golden calf to worship, as we see in Exodus 32:4, as Stephen quotes here. It's so ashamed. It's a shame that they went back to what they wanted to do in Egypt. And now, the final two verses here, God basically abandoned Israel due to their sin and idolatry, as shown in Amos 5:25 through 27. We see it in the prophet. He abandoned them temporarily because he basically divorced them temporarily because of their sin towards him, because of their rejection of him. And now we move into verses 44 through 50. This is part 5 of our outline, and this is where Stephen is talking about God's tabernacle. So, I'm going to read it from verse 44. Our fathers had their tabernacle of testimony in the wilderness, just as he who spoke to Moses directed him to make it according to the pattern which he had seen. And having received it in their turn, our fathers brought it in with Joshua, upon dispossessing the nations whom God drove out before our fathers, until the time of David. David found favor in God's sight, and asked that he might find a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built a house for him. However, the Most High does not dwell in houses made by human hands, as the prophet says, "Heaven is my throne, and earth is the footstool of my feet. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or what place is there for my response? Was it not my hand which made all these things?" What this section is really showing by Stephen is that the Sanhedrin, they had false accusations against him that he was blaspheming the temple. But Stephen was defending himself through this by explaining the history through the tabernacle, which showed his respect and honor for it. He knew this history and he honored it, and he spoke of David and he spoke of Solomon, and he spoke how Solomon was actually the one who built it and not even David, even though God was the one who built the Davidic covenant through David. It was actually Solomon who ended up building the house for him. And now, as he recaps this, we see now going into verse 48, we see a common phrase here. It says Most High, which is used throughout the Old Testament as a name for God. For example, I'm going to give you 3 passages. If you want to look at them, there's many more. But we see it in Deuteronomy 32:8, Psalm 7:17, and Isaiah 14:14. I had to throw a prophet in there because I just love the prophets. Just to name a couple, though. That's only to name a few. And now verses 49 and 50, they're quoted from the excellent passage of Isaiah 66, 1 through 2. And basically what Stephen was saying here is that God was greater and bigger than both the temple and the tabernacle. God is bigger He is stronger. He's more important because that is ultimately what we should be worshiping. It's not about a building. It's not about the church. It's not about the place. It's about the people that we're with worshiping our true God together. And now finally, we have in our final section, verses 51 through 53. This is where Stephen rebukes the Sanhedrin. I'm going to read it for you. You men who are stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears are always resisting the Holy Spirit. You are doing just as your fathers did. Which one of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They killed those who had previously announced the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. You who received the laws ordained by angels and yet did not keep it. The Sanhedrin did not like this rebuke by Stephen. He calls them stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart, and ears are always resisting the Holy Spirit. Those are strong words by Stephen. And the Sanhedrin were very displeased with that, as we are going to see in the coming section. You are doing just as your fathers did. He accused them of rejecting God the way that the Israelites did. He says that they did not keep or obey the laws they should have. And as we're going to see next time, one more time, the Sanhedrin did not appreciate this accusation. And I'm going to invite Matthew to just come back and close it up, what we'll be hitting next time.
Perfect. Thank you, Ethan. I know that was a really long section, but you did a great job there with your outline. So thank you so much for that. And like you said, we'll then come back into this. We're going to see the Sanhedrin's response to this. And like you mentioned a couple times, they are not happy. So we're going to see how they deal with Stephen here in our next episode. So thank you guys for joining us and listening in.